Fantastic. All right. We are still talking about metaphysics. We are in the middle of our discussion about metaphysics. Metaphysical questions are questions about what exists, what is real, what is actually out there in the universe. And one of the most fundamental metaphysical questions, at least I think, concerns the existence of God. Now, people believe in God for a variety of reasons, the least of which have anything to do with evidence in my experience. But there is a branch of philosophy that deals with these questions, and theistically there are approaches that religious people can take, or theists can take, to say we don't need supernatural revelation, or we don't need mysticism, or we don't need charismatic authority to tell us about God, because the evidence of God's creation is everywhere. And if we're open-minded and we look, we use the power of reason. And many people, or many theologians like Thomas Aquinas, said that, look, reason is the facility that God gave us to understand his creation. And by this account, and this account is called natural theology, the evidence for God's existence is everywhere. And we looked at two major arguments in natural theology: the cosmological argument, the argument of the first cause, that the universe could not have existed forever. It must have been brought into existence by something, and nothing can cause itself. Therefore, God, or a first cause, must exist. We also looked at the teleological argument, which suggested that the order and complexity of the universe is such that it's probable that there was an intelligent designer. And we looked at a more modern articulation of the teleological argument, the strong anthropic principle, that said, if we look at the configuration of constants and physical laws that allow life to exist, it simply is incomprehensibly improbable that happened by accident. Okay, so that's what we've done so far. Now we're going to be pushing back in the other direction with the problem of evil. And this is not, strictly speaking, an argument against God's existence, although it has, I think, made many. It has been a serious question for many people who walk a faith-based path. This question of, if God is all-powerful and all-knowing and all-good, why does evil exist? Why is there so much suffering? And so this is a serious question. And some of the most profound philosophers and theologians have struggled with this question, at least within the Abrahamic traditions. And we have a variety of responses to this, but I think that this is not one of those, it's not one of those areas where you can just wave your hand and engage in some rhetorical tricks and dismiss this argument, because, I mean, think about the amount of suffering and evil in the world, and it is horrific, and the scale of suffering is almost incomprehensible. And so, how could this be part of a divine plan? And this is the question. And so, Theodicy, not the Odyssey, it's Theodicy, is in philosophy. Theodicy is a defense of the goodness and omnipotence of God in view of the existence of evil. So when we're confronted by the horrific scale of the suffering that we see around us, how can we simultaneously claim that there is an all-powerful God who loves and cares for us? And that just seems very improbable. Now, A couple things to say. One, the characterization of God as omnipotent and omniscient and omnibenevolent, and for the record, that means all powerful, all knowing, and all good, is a post-biblical conception that is probably dates to maybe the 4th or 5th century Common Era. Okay, so this is a very late doctrine. If it is a doctrine at all, it's not biblical in any way, because God clearly, in most of particularly in the Hebrew Bible, is personified and is in a certain place and has certain limitations on what he can and cannot do. But over time, we have begun, theologians in particular, have begun to think of God as being immanent everywhere in the universe, as being omniscient, knowing everything. And this clearly, for most believers, the idea that God is omnipotent and omniscient and omnibenevolent is taken for granted. So that's the conception of God that we are going to talk about. And that's the conception of God that this argument assumes. But, that is not the ancient view of God, of Yahweh, or any of the deities on the great council of gods and in the most ancient Hebrew texts. These gods were real, and these gods were personified, and these gods were not omniscient, right? But that is clearly how we view God today, in the Western tradition, at least. The other thing we want to say is that this is not a problem for many other religions outside of the Abrahamic faith, because if we think of ancient polytheism, well, okay, the Greeks and Romans have a system where there are many gods, and these gods are far from perfect. They share many of the same psychological defects that humans do. They're motivated by the same desires. And so these gods often come into conflict with each other, and human beings get caught in these conflicts. And the result is pain, suffering, death, evil, all of that. And that simply is the universe we live in. And we need look no farther than Hesiod's text when he talks about the origin of the universe and the origin of the gods. And I told you the story of how Gaia emerged from chaos, and she created her lover Uranus, and when they had children, there was tension between them, and that tension resulted in a conflict between the Earth Mother and the Sky God. And as a result of that conflict, the Sky God was castrated. That's an ugly universe. I mean, it's beautiful and it's awesome and it's awe-inspiring, but it's also a place that is filled with intergenerational conflict, conflict within families, all kinds of suffering. It's not a place where we can expect milk and honey to flow. And there's a story, the Greeks tell a story about Zeus and the fates. And the story goes like this, that for every human being has a mixture of fates. And Zeus reaches into one of two baskets to determine how your life will go. And in one of the baskets, it is simply pure suffering, pure evil. And in the other basket, it is a mixture of some good things and some evil things. What is missing is the basket where, we experience bliss continually. That simply doesn't register in the psychology of the Greeks or the Romans. Humans suffer, right? And that's just the way the world operates. Similarly, Buddhism has the same diagnosis, that suffering is the first observation about life. The first great truth about life is that is suffering. We suffer. But our suffering is rooted in the attachment to the illusion of the body and the self. And there is a cure for this. When we recognize that our suffering is caused by our attachment to the things that are impermanent and changing, we can cut away those things and achieve enlightenment. Now, you don't have to do that. Buddhism doesn't make you feel bad if you're not. I mean, if you're not becoming a bodhisattva, Buddhism doesn't say you should feel bad. It's just if you want to eliminate the suffering on your path, there's a way to do it, and that's up to you. Because appetite and desire will drive you, to the point of madness. I mean, this is the human condition. We thirst for things, we desire things that we cannot have, because all of those things are impermanent and all of those things are changing. And even our sense of self. And I mean, think about how much we love our own bodies and are attached to our own bodies, but we know that our bodies decay, our bodies betray us. We wake up in the morning and we feel, oh my God, I can't believe I'm so old. Well, what did you think was going to happen? You were going to be young forever? No, life is suffering and life is pain. And when you are attached to the body, you will experience that suffering. The sense of self is the same thing. When you are attached to your own psychology, your personality, yourself, but that's an illusion too. So let it go. And it's like carrying this hot rock, right? And you're like, the rock is burning me and the rock is so heavy, but at any time you could just let that go, right? In Hinduism, particularly in the Upanishads and this great cycle, the Mahabharata, this great cycle of these family dynastic conflicts, which is a metaphor for the spiritual conflicts, of course, that all humans face. Suffering is simply an inevitable part of the karmic cycle, the life, the wheel of life and death. There's a dynamic process of endless creation and destruction within our world, and we're just part of that. And you can't just wish it away. You can, however, very similar to Buddhism, liberate yourself through enlightenment from this unnecessary suffering. It takes time, it takes discipline, right? But it can be done. In Taoism, as we've talked about previously, nature is just nature, and we are part of nature. We separate ourselves from nature. We create the veneer of civilization. We make rules for ourselves, but there's a Tao to nature. There's a way to nature, and that will not be denied. And so if you resist the kind of flow of the natural world, you will, you will suffer. We should rather simply accept that death is part of the natural cycle of life. Illness, death, and misfortune aren't intrinsically evil. They're just part of life. It's inevitable. And I always love when the Taoists say, if there is evil in the world, well, if that's not part of nature, you're creating that. So stop it. Now, evolutionary naturalism is an alternative hypothesis, right? We can step out of the point of view of religion and we can look at the world and say, why is the world like it is? Well, of course, the world is exactly as it should be because of chemical and biological evolution. And this is exactly what we would expect to see. In biological evolution, behavioral phenotypes are shaped by selective pressures. Animals have to compete for scarce resources, and they have to develop strategies by which they can survive and reproduce. Or they don't go on, right? Living organisms, all living organisms are engaged in a perpetual struggle for survival against competing organisms for the limited resources available. So there are a variety of things you can do. You can become a predator. You can eat other creatures. You can become prey, and just to hope you're fast enough to find the opportunity to reproduce, or a parasite. But all of these organisms live in an endless cycle of conflict. And even cooperative strategies like primates use or humans use. These cooperative strategies are best understood in the context of interspecies struggle. Like cooperating can give you certain advantages that you wouldn't normally have, right? So, yeah, evolutionary naturalism says, well, how did you expect the world would be? Right? This is just how things are. And it's surprising maybe that there's not more there's not more suffering, right? But in Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, this is a problem. Theodicy is a problem, right? The problem of evil is a legitimate problem. Why? Well, we think about it in the Abrahamic traditions. God is generally believed to be omnibenevolent and all good. And if God cares for us and loves us, why is there evil? Why is there suffering? Why is there so much suffering? Why is there so much evil? Why is suffering and pain an inevitable part of human life? If God is good, why did God created the universe? Why did God create the universe in this particular way? That's a legitimate question. Now, there are answers here, but they're not superficial answers. They require a lot of serious thought and reflection. And I think of all the topics that we look at, this takes the most, this takes the most discipline to approach in a coherent way. Because suffering touches all of us, and we've all faced losses. And we all, of course, are united by the fragile condition of our humanity, which at any moment our life can be radically transformed or taken away from us. And that is really true. And that is something that we will talk about when we talk about the Stoics. But I really do, because most of you are really young people. And so you don't take the time to appreciate the tenuous nature of your life, because it's fragile. It's so fragile, right? And in a heartbeat, everything can be lost. So when we think about gratitude and appreciation, realize that you are on, at every moment, you are on the threshold of complete and utter disaster. And everything in your life can be taken from you, and we can lose everything in a heartbeat. And that I think, I know that sounds, well, Professor, why would I want to think about that? Because it puts the rest of your life in context, right? And so you see the people that you love, you should always imagine in the back of your head, what if this was the last time? Because it could be. And that's just the world we live in, right? Under the best of circumstances, that's the world we live in. And for many people around the globe, it's not the best of circumstances. So it's like we think about probabilities. Well, it's very unlikely that your whole world will, it can happen. But for some people on the globe, it's like, yeah, that's probably going to happen. Think about that. Okay. So why did God set it up that way? We got some accountability here, right? We want to think about that. If God is good, why is there evil? Here's the argument. Now, again, do not construe this as an argument against God's existence. And I'll tell you why in a minute. So premise one, God is omnipotent. Again, these are modern notions about the nature of God. These aren't ancient notions. God is always personified in a very physical way, right? God is omnipotent. That's the way that we think about God today, though. God is powerful enough to stop evil. God is all powerful, could do anything. God is omniscient. God is aware of the evil. God is omnibenevolent. That is, God loves us, does not want us to suffer, and wants to stop the evil. But premise four, evil exists. Now, here's the argument. The argument is not that God does not exist. The argument is that one or more of the above premises must be false because they're incompatible. If God could stop evil, if he knows about the evil, if he wanted to stop the evil, he could. And by the way, I'm using the gender pronoun for God because that's just traditional. I have no, yeah, I mean, it's just easier. I found this. It's a really nice flow chart. And you can see all the permutations of this argument. Can God prevent evil? Yes or no? If the answer is no, which is an interesting. Now, see, if we go back here, we see, oh, we can give up any of these premises, and then theodicy is not a problem. We simply say, oh, God is not omnipotent. Oh, God is not omniscient. Oh, God isn't really good in the way that we think of good. Then it's none of that is a problem. Maybe God doesn't want to prevent the evil because God is not good in the way that we think. And I mean, think about the God of the Hebrew Bible. That is not a God that is motivated to stop evil. Okay. It's not. That's not a problem, though. You just have to change your assumption about what God is all about. Or there was a really good book by a rabbi a few years, now a decade or two ago, called Why Bad Things Happen to Good People. And his argument was God doesn't want bad things to happen, but God is not omnipotent. God can't stop that. There are just some things God cannot do. Now, what's the problem with that approach? The problem with that approach is that most theists today are completely wedded to these ideas that God is omniscient, omnipotent, and omnibenevolent. And they don't want to give up any of that. And so the Theodicy says you can't have your cake and eat it too. You have to eat one of these premises. If evil exists, and I mean, it's pretty clear it does, although Augustine will argue that it doesn't, then something is wrong with our conception of God. Right? Okay, that's the argument. Now, maybe we just need to reconsider what we mean by good. And so here, one way to approach this, and again, let's think about the distinction between ethics and religion. So ethics and morality are just codes and duties derived from valuations of right and wrong about what obligations we owe other people, right? And these are just standards that human beings try to figure out about what's the best way for us to live together. I mean, ethics and morality is in their most religious traditions encompass some commandments about ethics, right? You shouldn't kill other people, you shouldn't lie, you shouldn't steal, things like that. But mostly this is humans just trying to figure out how we should live. Religion, on the other hand, generally concerns our obligations to a divine being or beings. And so here we're thinking about commands from God. Now, we know, right? We know, let me move this slide here real quick. I was fooling around with these slides. We know that religious and ethical duties can come into conflict, at least what most people would see as an ethical duty might come in conflict with a religious duty. And we see this in the Hebrew Bible with the story of Abraham and Isaac. And we talked about this story before. Abraham chosen by God, and it lives to a very, very old age because God blesses him. And the angel appears to Abraham and says, you have to make a sacrifice. And then surprisingly makes it clear to Abraham that he must sacrifice his beloved son Isaac. And he does love his son very much. And we know that when we think about our ethical obligations, I cannot think of a more fundamental ethical obligation than to protect a child and to protect one's own child. And the idea of doing harm to one's own child violates, the most fundamental conception of ethics in every way. So here, God commands Abraham to do something that's immoral. Okay, well, how do we deal with that? One way to deal with this, traditionally, is to simply say, well, if there's a conflict between religious duties and divine duties, or religious duties and ethical duties, well, religious duties are more important. They're more primary, because ultimately, it's about what God says is right. And so this brings us to divine command theory, which is a way out of this problem. So whatever God commands us to do has moral authority, is the right thing to do by definition. And so this creates a foundation for ethics that is transcendental, like what is right, whatever God says. Now, this creates a problem, though, and Plato picked up on this problem in the Euthyphro. And so the implication of this is that, so what is right and wrong is completely arbitrary. God could, tell us to commit genocide or engage in slavery or murder our children, and then that would be the right thing to do. And that just doesn't sit right with a lot of people. That moral codes, completely arbitrary. God could change his mind at any time. It seems like God should command things that are intrinsically right. But if you say that there's a sense of right and wrong in the universe that is like intrinsically right, that is the absolute core of morality, by implication, you're saying there's a standard of behavior that is higher than God, that God must conform to these principles. And that also is something that most theists don't want to acknowledge. And so there's a problem here with divine command theory. So either Abraham is a potential murderer, or our moral duties based on human reason don't apply to God. And so, again, we see the same problem in the Bhagavad Gita with Prince Arjuna. Arjuna refuses to fight. He looks across the field of battle. He says, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to fight my own blood. I'm not going to fight my uncles and my cousins. And this war is crazy, and this doesn't make any sense. And Krishna then gives Arjuna the God vision and says, you're the problem with you, Arjuna, is that you're human, which is the problem we all share, right? What does it mean to be human? It means that you don't understand the universe as it actually is. You're mired in illusion, and you based your valuations of right and wrong on things that are illusory, like your conception of pain and death and suffering is completely misunderstanding the nature of the universe. And so Krishna gives Arjuna the God vision, and Arjuna sees things from the point of view of the gods, and then everything makes sense to him. There's a great karmic wheel, there's a great spiritual struggle, and this battle is nothing. And what human beings see as evil and suffering and pain and death is irrelevant. That what matters is the great karmic wheel that is turning and the cycle of creation and destruction, and that we all have a role to play, and that we do our duty and we do as the gods command us to do. And so here, the idea is if you could simply see things from the perspective of the gods or the perspective of God, then you would understand and everything would make sense. Right? So just shut up and do your duty. And Kierkegaard, of course, this is where he ends up. And Kierkegaard is a Christian theologian and philosopher, a fantastic philosopher. And he says, you read these stories. He wasn't familiar, of course, with the Bhagavad Gita, but he was very familiar with the story of Abraham, and he wrote extensively on it. There's only one lesson that you could take from this. A divine command from God transcends ethics. Ethics don't matter. Ethics is human. Ethics is limited. Our conception of morality is rooted in our understanding of the world, which is nothing. We don't understand anything about the world. So we create moral systems. We do our best. And moral systems, Kierkegaard says, yeah, they're important. But if a command from God transcends ethics or commands us to do something that we would think we would object to, there's no contest. We follow God. We submit ourselves to God. And so a religious person must be prepared for a command from God that would take precedence over all moral or even rational obligations. And this reminds me of something Tertullian said in response to the heresy of the Marcionites. And Tertullian said, because the Marcionites were saying that, as I understand it, I'm not an expert, but as I understand the Marcion heresy, they were saying that, Jesus wasn't God, or that may be the Ebionites. But they were saying something that Tertullian, the monk, did not like. And Tertullian said in his response to the Marcionites, I believe because it is absurd. The doctrine of the Trinity, that Jesus is God, is an absurd doctrine, and that proves it in a way, because it transcends our rational understanding of what is possible. And that is not that reason and logic don't matter. It's just that God transcends all of that. Right? Now, it's not just in the tradition of Christianity and Judaism that we see this, or Islam. We also see something similar here with Sophocles and in the Oedipus, and this is a play that some of you may be familiar with, but this play is often misunderstood because Sophocles is a religious conservative, and he's very upset that Athens is filled with people who are questioning the gods. And it is a time, Sophocles is writing, of great achievement in Athens. It's the pinnacle of Athens, right, of culture and intellectual and philosophy. But Sophocles says there's a dark side to all this rationality. And the dark side is we're losing touch with our ability to communicate with the gods, right? And so the story of Oedipus is the story of a great king, very, very smart guy, very capable man, a very good king, Oedipus, and Oedipus is warned by an oracle that he will murder his father and marry his mother. And Oedipus, being a super smart guy, tries to outwit the gods and tries to avoid his fate. And this is the real tragedy in from Sophocles' point of view, because Oedipus is putting his own reason against the power of the gods. He's going to lose, and in a horrific way. Not only does the prophecy come true, despite everything that he tries to do to avoid it, it destroys him, because he only then realizes the true predicament of humans. Our capacity for reason and our capacity for understanding is so limited that we're like children. And for any person to think that they can outsmart fate or outsmart the gods is arrogance, hubris, right? And he blinds himself because the truth was so obvious and he ignored it, right? And he blinds as he pokes out his own eyes, right? Now we get a different take here from the Brothers Karamazov, which is Dostoevsky. It's one of my favorite books. It's the story of a Russian family, brothers in the Brothers Karamazov, the titular brothers. And Dostoevsky is a Christian. He is. And he is a very profound thinker. And he is haunted by this question of suffering, as many believers are. Many genuine believers are kind of haunted by this question of why there is suffering, and in particular, why do children suffer, right? Because children are innocent, at least according to some people. If you've had children, you know that's not true. Just kidding. So in the Brothers Karamazov, I'm going to focus on just a small one chapter. It's a very famous chapter, of course. But the two brothers we're going to look at is Ivan and Alyosha. And Ivan, like what you have to understand contextually about this book is written at a time like Sophocles, right? In Sophocles' Athens, Russia is modernizing. And many people are moving away from the church. And it is a time of reason and the Enlightenment and science and technology and industry. And it seems like Russia is going to integrate itself into Europe, the rest of Europe. But of course, that never happens. Historically, it doesn't. But Ivan is a modern person. I mean, he would fit in our world. And he demands a rational explanation for everything. He cannot reconcile himself with this idea of all of this suffering, all of the injustice in the world. How can there be all of this suffering, all of this evil, all of this injustice, and there be a loving God? It doesn't make any sense. Now, he's not, strictly speaking, an atheist. He believes in God, but he rejects God. His brother Alyosha, his younger brother, is a saint, like literally a saint. He's a great character. Dostoevsky models this character on the life of Jesus, except obviously Alyosha is not a supernatural being. He's just a man. But he's kind, he's loving, he's gentle. He's wise. And he possesses a natural, simple faith in God that translates into a genuine love for mankind. He's one of the most compelling figures in all of literature. He's just he's completely open, and he has great empathy and compassion for everyone. But he's tormented. What is he tormented by? This question of suffering. How can you not be? How can you look at the suffering that you see in the world and not be moved by that in some way. And so he struggles with his faith. I think as all serious religious people do, he struggles with these questions and he tries to find an answer. And, look, if I were to approach this from the point of view of a theist in that tradition, I would say, God doesn't promise it's going to be easy, right? The road of a believer actually is not an easy road to walk on. And things will be asked of you. Okay. And so you're going to have to figure out an answer, a real answer to satisfy yourself to this question of suffering, right? Now, they're having one of their debates about God. They are. And they talk about God all the time. And the question turns to this issue of theodicy. And Ivan says, look, I'm going to tell you a story, Alyosha, and it's just one story. This is one of countless stories, but I'm going to tell it. I'm going to tell you a story about the suffering of a child. Why a child? Because children are innocent. If it was an adult, well, you just say they were corrupted by sin or something. But here, this is a little child, an innocent child. And there is a retired Russian general who lives on a great estate. And this general is slowly slipping into dementia or some other form of insanity. Now, this general is obsessed with his hunting dogs. And there are serfs, young serfs, attending the dogs. Now, a serf in Russia is kind of like a slave. And one of the serfs is a young child. And this young child, he picks up a stone. He picks up a stone and he throws the stone, and it hurts the paw of one of the hunting dogs. Now, these hunting dogs are gigantic. They're vicious. These big hounds, right? These Russian hounds. And as punishment for the child, the general has the child stripped naked in front of his mother. And he turns the hunting dogs on the child, and the child is ripped to pieces. Now, Ivan tells that story to Alyosha and says, where was your God? Where was your God when this child was being ripped to pieces by dogs? What kind of horrible monster would allow this to happen when it's easily preventable? Because your God is all powerful, right? What does your God do? Watch silently while this child is ripped to pieces. That's just no words for that. Alyosha looks at his brother Ivan and says, Ivan, you don't understand. You don't understand. Like all humans, we are trapped in our perspective of good and bad. But if you could see the world from the perspective of God, remember that God is outside of time and space. God sees all things. And at the end of time, Ivan, at the end of time, all suffering and evil will be done. It will vanish. We cannot see the world from the perspective of God. We are trapped by time and matter. But in the end, on the day of judgment, the justice of God will make all things right. The lion will lie down with the lamb, and the mother will forgive the killer. When Ivan hears this, he can't, just goes off on Alyosha. He says that I can't believe you'd say something so stupid as that. And he says, like, look, I don't care if there's eternal harmony at the end of time. I don't care if it's an infinite paradise that lasts eternally. It's not worth the suffering of a single child. And nothing that happens will make that child whole again. Because that child was ripped to pieces by dogs in front of its mother, and nothing can undo that. A God that would allow preventable suffering and death of an innocent child is not worthy of worship. I believe that your God exists, Alyosha, but your God is a monster. And so Ivan says, I don't want any part of this. Like this whole system. I give back my ticket. I'm not going on this ride, right? I don't want harmony. For the love of humanity, I don't want it. I would rather be left with the unavenged suffering. I would rather remain with my unavenged suffering and unsatisfied indignation, even if I were wrong. Besides, too high a price is asked for harmony. It's beyond our means to pay so much to enter it. And so I give you back my ticket. It's not God that I don't accept. It's this whole system. And then he looks at Alyosha and he says, look, okay, what if you were God? What if you were God? What if you were God? Alyosha, what if you were God? And you could set up the universe in any way you wanted to, because you're omnipotent. And you had this great eternal harmony where the lion lies down with the lamb and the mother forgives and all of that happens. Would all of that be worth the suffering of a single child? Is that how you would set it up? Even if one single child had to be ripped apart by dogs to get your eternal harmony, would it be worth it? And Alyosha just thinks about that and says, no, it wouldn't. I wouldn't do that. No future reward or state of harmony could be justified if it is at the cost of even a single child's suffering. Wow. that's a hell of a book, right? That's a hell of a book. Struggling with these issues and thinking about these things. It's not easy. It's not easy. So we think about possible explanations for this. What are the arguments that are given to account for the suffering of innocence in a universe created by a benevolent God? So the oldest, if we look at the oldest parts of the Hebrew Bible, we get the kind of the most basic theodicy possible. It's not very popular today, but I mean it is a biblical doctrine at least, and that is the obvious question: why do you suffer? Like when you look at, say, God, why am I suffering? Why are these terrible things happening to you? The oldest answer is, I think, really blunt. You deserve it. You did something, okay? You know what you did, right? You know what you did. You're getting what you deserve. And I think that, like, there's something called the just world fallacy. And this is where people believe that economic outcomes are determined by a person's moral character. And so rich people, obviously, they're living a good life. And poor people, homeless people, well, They must deserve it in some way, right? And so you see this kind of fallacy operating today. But it's an old view, right? If you suffer, if you're something as bad has happened to you, it's your fault. The wicked suffer as punishment for their sin. End of story. Uh, I'm going to talk a little bit about the book of Job, which is a very kind of old text, and it's one of my favorite texts. And in Job, the story of Job is that Yahweh, the God of the Hebrews, is in council with another kind of quasi deity named the Satan. And again, the Satan is not evil or bad, or the Satan is just a kind of counselor that gives God advice. And this is a very common notion in ancient religion, that there's a council of gods, and God is Yahweh is thinking about, well, look at my follower Job. He's a righteous man, and the Satan says, maybe, but it's true that you've only given him blessings and you haven't done anything bad to him. And Yahweh is like, well, what do you mean by that? Satan's like, I'm just saying, maybe if you made his life a little more difficult. And so they place a bet. I know that sounds weird, but that's what they do, right? And so Satan goes and he takes away stuff from Job. He takes away his animals and his wealth, and his children die, and he gets horrible blisters and scars all over his body, pustules. Now, my favorite part of this story by far is when Job's friends come over. And all of his friends come to visit him, and they look at him, and he's just in really bad shape. And here's the great thing about this story. They all look at him and they all go, Job, what did you do? You must have really done something bad, because God would not just arbitrarily do this. Obviously, you're a terrible person. Curse God and die. Now, with friends like that, right? They just look at him, curse God and die, they tell him. I just love that part of the book. I mean, that your friends come over and they blame you for your misfortunes, right? But yes, this is one way to do it. It's not very popular today, but it's one, and think about how easy this makes it for you. Some of you have friends, they're going through very hard times, they're suffering losses, they have illnesses. Try this out. Do the Job thing. Go over there and say, you must be a terrible person. That's all. I curse God and die. What horrible friends, right? Okay, redemptive suffering. And this is a very powerful idea, that when we endure suffering, it gives us the opportunity to grow and to cultivate virtue. And suffering can confer a benefit even if we're unaware of it. And we see this with the story of Joseph and his slavery. He becomes a slave, right? We see this with the death of Lazarus, with many things, right? Many stories, that when we suffer, we grow. And I think there's something to that, right? I think that nobody grows unless they're challenged. And when we look at the Stoics are going to teach that we have to have the courage to seek out challenges. Like, the obstacle is the way. We have to seek out challenges in order to grow. And we don't grow by just sitting around in comfort. We don't grow morally. We don't, even like your body. I mean, can you train your body? What do you have to do to train your body to be an athlete, or to be stronger, to be faster? You have to get out there and experience some suffering. You can't just sit on your couch and become a great athlete. Well, you can't become a good person if you're never challenged. And so maybe God gives us the opportunity to become better by presenting us with these challenges to overcome. And we'll get back to that idea with Swinburne. And I think that's a powerful idea. Now, there's an idea that's certainly older than Christianity. And this is the idea of absolute evil. And this goes back to the not to ancient the ancient Hebrews, but this goes back to like Zoroastrians and the Manichees, which were both religions that were predicated on the idea that the world is bifurcated between good and evil. Now, that conception sneaks its way into Christian theology. And remember that Satan, that in the Hebrew Bible is just a kind of counselor to God. Well, in the Hellenistic period, we start to see, the Satan become this personification of evil. And I think that's coming more from Zoroastrianism or Manichaeism, right? The idea that, right, humans get caught in these great struggles between demons and in the Hellenistic period, I mean, is a period where like everybody believes in demons. Like demons are everywhere, and not just within Hellenistic Judaism and Hellenistic, and then later Christianity, but these demonic figures are part of Greek culture. They're part of Roman culture, and they're just everywhere in a way that they really weren't for the ancient Jews. So figures who personify evil, such as Satan, and it's certainly by the medieval period, man, Satan is really out of control. And then you get these references in the Revelation of John and stuff, but like, I mean, you do your that is not a concept that is in the early Bible, in the Hebrew text. It's not. People say, well, what about the snake in Genesis? The snake in Genesis is a snake. Sometimes a snake is just a snake. So figures who personify evil, such as Satan, demons, devils, introduce suffering into the world as a consequence of their corrupted natures. And like here's the problem that I have with all of this. If we're going to pretend that these religions are monotheistic, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't have independent deities who are running around causing havoc that aren't under the direct control of God. Just can't do that. It's not, I mean, that's not what monotheism is about. Now, it's my view that these religions have never really been monotheistic anyway. Yahweh is a deity that predates the ancient Hebrews, the Canaanites, the Assyrians, right? Yahweh, Baal, Asherah. These are all gods that we find before the Hebrews. But if you're going to say that these are monotheistic traditions, you have a problem. Because if it's in true monotheism, like God is omnipotent, why does God create Satan? Why does God create these evil demons and things? And then you have to get very creative about your world building, and that it just doesn't make sense. Not to me. Maybe it does to you. Another theodicy is that evil is necessary to know the good, that God has created the universe in such a way that to really appreciate the good, there has to be some contrast. Kind of makes sense. Without some evil, we would not be able to recognize and develop the good. I guess that kind of makes sense in a way, right? That we understand things. We would not understand the nature of good unless we had something to contrast it to. Some problems with this view, however, this does limit God's omnipotence. Like all powerful means all powerful. So God could have created the world any way that God wanted to. Why is there so much evil in the world? Did we really need slavery, childhood leukemia, or the Holocaust to understand that there's a difference between good and bad? Wouldn't the mere appearance of evil be enough? Why doesn't God just tell us there's something called evil? Maybe evil is an illusion. And here we go to St. Augustine. And very cleverly, St. Augustine says, evil doesn't exist. Well, wait, what? Now, you may be tempted to think that's kind of a crazy statement, but you'd be underestimating the intellect of Augustine because he's a brilliant man. And Augustine says, look, what we call evil is simply the absence of good, like a shadow, right? A shadow is the absence of light. It's not really a thing in itself. It's just a consequence of moving out of the light. Humans move out of the light, don't they? Why do they do that? Why would humans do that? Well, because God created human beings with autonomy, with free will. And this is an essential doctrine, I think, within all of these great religions, that human beings choose their own path. And so, assuming that humans do have free will, you could see why this creates problems. Because for humans to legitimately have the capacity to make moral choices, sometimes they will choose wrong. So God wants us to do certain things. God wants us to treat each other with care, with consideration, with compassion. But sometimes human beings, for a variety of reasons, don't. Whose fault is that? That's our fault, right? So Augustine says these choices are less good than what God desires. Not evil, but only we're not meeting the high standard of behavior that God would expect from us. We're falling short because of our sinful nature. And we're creating a kind of vacuum. And in that vacuum, all kinds of terrible things happen. Now, you're probably thinking, well, then God screwed up, right? By making us that way. Why did God give us free will? Augustine has an answer for that. Because God wants to create a world that has the greatest possible good. Imagine that God created humans to do the right thing every time, but the cost of that is that we were just machines. We were not free to make our own choices. That would be a good world, but it would not be as good as a world in which our own choices led to the cultivation of virtue and character. And so this is the world that God creates. We control the kind of people we become. And a world in which that is possible is superior to a world in which we are robots. Good job, Augustine. Good job. You get an A. I'll give you an A. There's problem, no. And we'll talk about that problem. We will talk about that problem. We will look at, I think this is the strongest argument in this kind of response, and we will talk about the free will problem. Maybe there's no explanation, or humans just don't get an explanation. And so we go back to Job. Now, at the end of Job, because you guys are probably wondering, if you've never read the book, what happens to Job? Well, Job never curses God. He doesn't listen to his friends. He never curses God. And God rewards him at the end of the story. Yes. He even gets new children. Now, I always like that part in the story where all of your children die. But if you get new children, then it's okay. I don't think the author of this book understands the relationship between parent and child. I don't think so. But anyways, that's what happened. Job becomes richer. He gets everything. His health returns, all of this stuff. But he's really pissed. He's not happy. And he actually gets a chance to confront God. And the whirlwind opens up in front of him. And of course, God is incomprehensible being, and the whirlwind just and Job is like, why did you do this to me? I was your faithful servant. I never did anything wrong. I lived a good life. Why did I have to suffer? Now, again, great book. How does God justify everything that happened to Job? Doesn't. Just says, who are you again? Why are we having this meeting? Where were you when I created the universe? When I separated the light from darkness, what were you doing? Yeah, that's what I thought. Now get out of here before you piss me off. That's what Job gets. And Job realizes he's made a mistake, and he falls on the ground and he begs for forgiveness. We don't get an explanation. Nobody owes, God does not owe us an explanation. You suffer, deal with it. Unless you were there when I created the world, shut your mouth. I like that. Okay, is evil a consequence of free will? Going back to Augustine, and I think this is a really, really strong argument. It's a good argument. It has problems, though. Human beings are the cause of evil because we are disobedient to God's will. God has a different plan for the world, but we, come on, humans being what they are, we keep making the wrong choice. It's our sinful nature. And of course, for Augustine, our sinful nature goes back before we're even born. So even children are corrupted. Their nature is corrupted. Man, this is, quite frankly, I have to tell you that as a doctrine, I think this is, maybe it makes sense. But as a doctrine, I think this is a pretty destructive doctrine. But maybe it is necessary. Maybe it is true. I don't know. I wasn't there when the universe was created. But God gave us the power to choose. So if we choose evil, well, we made our own bed. We're lying in it, right? Okay, what are the objections to this? And I think the objections matter. What does omnipotent mean? Okay, this limits God's power again. If you're going to say that God is not omnipotent, okay, great, that's good. But you want to say that God is omnipotent. Omnipotent means God could have created the universe in any way God wanted to. God could have created a universe in which humans had free will, but chose the right thing. I can think of a way right now he could have just screened out individuals that would make the wrong choice. They never come into existence. Problem solved. So an all-powerful God should be able to create a world in which humans have free will, but at least are less inclined to do evil. Look, at the moment of our creation, God knew everything that would happen, right? God is omniscient. Yet, even knowing all the suffering that would happen, God created it anyway. God made the rules. God set the foundation. If the house is crooked, who do you blame? The person that laid the foundation. God made us like this. And so God's going to be upset that we act according to our nature when God is the author of human nature. That makes no sense at all. God is responsible for this. Imagine that you make a robot and you program that robot with certain characteristics and abilities. You give the robot the ability to learn and adapt to its environment. You program the robot to kick soccer balls on a playground. But the robot also begins to kick kittens and small dogs instead. Shouldn't you have foreseen that? Whose fault is that? That's your fault. That's bad design. Now, even if we accept the free will argument, the free will argument does not explain natural evils. Floods, famine, earthquakes, diseases, predation, parasites, all of this stuff. What does that have to do with moral choice? Well, some people would argue that, okay, humans magnify these natural catastrophes by their choices. We shouldn't build in a flood zone. We shouldn't construct cities where they could burn easily, etc. Okay. But come on. I mean, there are diseases that are unrelated to human behavior and they do a lot of damage, right? So, how do we explain natural evils? Further, think about this thing. This thing was designed according to theists, exactly like it looks like, with all of those teeth. This is a creature that can only survive by destroying other living organisms, by ripping them to pieces. That is intentional. That's part of the design. What possible moral purpose could that have? That makes no sense. Why are you going to design and the law? Look, what is the law of nature? Okay, if you accept the hypothesis that we're all here through natural selection, what would you expect the world to look like? Oh, well, anything that can fit into something else's mouth is going to end up there, right? That's just the way that evolution works. But if I were to tell you that, oh, this world was created by an omnipotent God who loves us and cares for us, all of his creations, and God designed this. Wouldn't you have some questions? By the way, why do animals have to suffer? There's no moral edification. Animals aren't cultivating virtue. Think about the scale of animal suffering in the world. It's a big question, isn't it? This brings us to Swinburne, and Swinburne gives us an amazing theodicy here, I think. And it's well thought out and it's well crafted. It has some limitations. But Swinburne is going to take Augustine's argument and then bring it forward just a little bit. Now, Swinburne is an apologist. He's not a philosopher. He's a theist and he's an apologist. What does that mean? Okay, let's make this distinction very clear. Because one of the things I told you in our class, we just ask questions. We don't start with a view and then defend that view. An apologist begins with a view and then looks for arguments to defend that view. And that's what Swinburne is doing. Okay, there's no way around that. Swinburne begins his argument with a controversial assumption, but I mean, okay, that's what apologists do. We have to accept it as it is. Swinburne just simply says, God is good. And so, God would not have permitted human beings to suffer unless it served a greater purpose. Now, again, that's not an argument per se, it's an assertion. So you believe it or you don't. But in order to understand Swinburne's theodicy, you have to begin here with his assumption that God would not have created the universe in this way unless it made some sense. And that's a real limitation in a philosophy class. But I mean, in your ordinary life, I think if you're a believer, you can start here very easily and say, yeah, there has to be some reason. Right? So, how does Swinburne explain this? The possibility of sin is necessary if human beings are to develop in character and to have the opportunity to serve one another and develop virtue. Suffering is necessary for our character to develop. I think that's a strong argument. God could not have given us the goods of significant freedom, responsibility, and usefulness without allowing for the possibility of lots of moral and natural evil. Just couldn't have. So if you want to create a universe where people can develop morally, can develop their character, and I think I think here he's saying there's a limitation on what God can do. God had to create the universe this way. And that's fine. That gets us out of the theodicy, but it also limits God's omnipotence. Maybe that's the price we have to pay. That God could not have done this any other way. And a world in which we can develop our character is better than a world in which we're just robots. Now, here's another assertion, and I think it's an interesting assertion, and we should think about it a lot. But what is more important? Is it more important to be good, or is it more important to be happy? What if you can't do both? And that may be the case, right? Swinburne says it's great to be happy, but it's more important to be good. Both states are desirable, but being good has a greater value. And he just asserts that, but again, that's what Swinburne is doing. I mean, that makes sense, right? Freedom and responsibility includes the ability to freely choose what kind of person you will become. You have control over that. You could choose to be a bad person. You could choose to be a good person. You're in control. You're not a robot. God could have made you a robot that did the right thing every time. But God did not do it that way because the choice now is up to you. It's better that the choice is up to you, isn't it? we can shape our own life and our own character, that's a better world to live in than if we're just robots and we have no freedom. Now, what would it be like to live in a world of robots that just did the right thing? Well, everything would be hunky-dory. Everything would be great. But we would just be programmed. And that's not, that world has very little appeal to me. It's better to be free and make the wrong decision to be a robot and do the right thing every time. This is what Swinburne is saying. And God knows that. So let's put this another way. When you guys are sinning, it's just following God's plan. I mean, you're contributing to a good, right? Because, yeah, maybe you're making the wrong choice, but you're exercising your autonomy, and that's a good thing. Because you sin today, but maybe you make up for it tomorrow. So go ahead, sin a little today, but tomorrow, do some good. That's how you exercise your autonomy. You're not a robot. You're not programmed. That's not the way that God made you. Okay, we still have this problem of natural evil, though. What about natural evil? Swinburne has an answer. Why is there natural evil? Well, a world in which causes regularly produce certain types of predictable effects is necessary to give people knowledge that their actions will have consequences. So we know that the world works in predictable ways. But a world that acts in predictable ways, well, bad things can happen in that world, like earthquakes and fires and floods. Now, the second argument that he has, there's the predictability argument, but the second argument he has, he says, look, a world with natural evils drastically increases the range of significant choices we can make. I think this is true, but it's a kind of weird argument, right? You will never have the opportunity to rescue a child from a burning house if the house never catches on fire. You see what I'm saying? Yeah, Dylan, love the look on your face. You will never have the opportunity to rescue a dog from a flood unless something floods. You look incredulous, Dylan. So unless your house burns down, you'll never have the opportunity to run in there and save a child. And isn't it important to have the opportunity to be able to do that? It kind of is true. I mean, think about it. When are humans at their best? War, earthquake, flood, fire. You see people, ordinary people, stand up and do heroic things. World Trade Center, the stories of the people who are guiding people down the stairway and the smoke and the fire. And had those aircraft not hit the buildings, no one would have an opportunity to develop their character in that way. That's what Swinburne is saying. Yeah, it's horrible, but we live in a world in which, we're not just mindless puppets. We take agency, and when something terrible happens, we have the opportunity to become better. Yeah, okay, that's a harsh argument, isn't it? But it's an interesting argument. What about animal suffering? Here, Swinburne has zero explanation. I mean, he tries, but he completely fails. Maybe animals suffer significantly less than humans. Come on, seriously? No. Ultimately, he says, look, there must be some reason, because a good God would not allow this to happen without some reason. I mean, okay. But again, that's not an argument. What does evolutionary naturalism say? Evil's not a thing. Not really. When we see people do bad things, we call them evil. But most of the harm that is done comes from motives that were adaptive for our ancestors and which remain present in every normal person. We just live in a different context. Our propensity for violence, very useful for our Paleolithic ancestors, not so useful for us today. From an adaptive perspective, again, we should not be surprised by violence. It's a struggle for life and death out there, and humans are part of the natural world, and we're not immune from that. In fact, when we think of evolutionary motives for violence, there are many: predation, self-protection, dominance, a sense of retribution. Sadism may have its roots in the psychological recognition of our own physical vulnerability. And then, as social creatures, think of ideology, both religious and political, submission to community norms, reputation protect. There's a lot of motivations for people to do terrible things. And they're all rooted in who we are as organisms, and in response to the adaptive pressures of living on this planet. An intergroup cooperation probably developed in response to competitive pressures between rival groups. Why would we expect empathy to operate well between groups of strangers? Doesn't anywhere in the natural world. And if you look at our primate ancestors, or not our primate ancestors, but our primate cousins, Pan-Paniscus, Pan-Troglodytes in particular, chimps practice organized violence. They do. We see that. It's not the only thing that they do, though. Pan-Paniscus, bonobos, we're also very closely related to them. They're also our cousins, and they have different strategies for resolving conflict. I don't want to get into the details, but they're quite explicit. And they have different ways of diffusing tension without devolving into violence, although they are capable of violence. So we ask ourselves, from an evolutionary perspective, are we good or are we bad? Are we more like chimps or are we more like bonobos? And today, human biology, ecology, and culture interact in ways that allow humans to be the most violent, despicable creatures on the earth, but also simultaneously the planet's most compassionate and cooperative creatures. So who are we? Interesting question, isn't it? Wow, so much stuff. Man, my head's about to explode. So much stuff going on here. And wow, heavy topic. And I appreciate you guys hanging in there.